Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Enduring Long COVID. I'm Sherry, and today I want to talk about what happened after I thought I was recovering because I wasn't. I had returned to work after my first COVID infection, believing that I was getting better. I wasn't because I wasn't back to normal, but I thought recovery was still possible. What I didn't realize was that my body was still struggling. I was still short of breath. My heart rate was still elevated. I still had chest pain. I still had brain fog. And I still felt exhausted. As a nurse, I knew something wasn't right. And my doctor knew it too. My physician actually wrote on a reasonable accommodation recommended that I not be exposed to COVID patients because another infection would not be good for me. Looking back now, again, she was right, but the accommodation was denied. I was sent back to bedside nursing during the middle of the pandemic, and I tried. I really did. I continued working. I wore PPE. I took care of my patients. But the truth is, I was already very sick. I remember trying to work while feeling short of breath. My heart rate was elevated. My body felt different. Even wearing the protective equipment was difficult because I already felt like I couldn't get enough air. But I kept going because that's what nurses do. Then another thing happened. I received a notice that I had been exposed to COVID again, and that was in December, late December. In early December of January 2021, I tested positive for COVID. Again, the strange thing is that I didn't immediately realize I had COVID again because I had never recovered from the first infection. I was already sick. I was already exhausted. I was already short of breath. I was already struggling. So when my symptoms increased, I didn't realize I was experiencing a second infection. I was off work for several weeks for this time, and my symptoms became worse. At that point, I began to feel as though I was losing control of my health and my career at the same time. There were concerns about my job. I worried about whether I could be able to continue working. I worried about losing my career. I was also worried about my future. Eventually, I was given a reasonable accommodation because when I came back to work the second round, I was huffing and puffing on the floor. And I went into my manager's office and I told her, I just can't do this. And she sent me home. And then the next day, I had a reasonable accommodation and I was moved to the GI lab. For a while, I worked there. And later, I was found a permanent position in community care. Eventually, I began working from home. Most people would assume that moving away from bedside nursing solved the problem, but it didn't. The symptoms followed me. I was still exhausted. I was still struggling. I was still trying to understand why my body no longer worked the way it used to. There were days when I would lie down during my lunch break because I was so exhausted. Sometimes I would fall asleep and wake up hours later, not because I was lazy, not because I didn't care about my job, but because my body was overwhelmed. And over the years, I used every hour of FMLA that was given to me. And every year, I used all of my sick leave. I used all of my annual leave. And I used all of my vacation days and holidays, not to travel, not to relax, but to recover. Sometimes I would take a week off and need 2 weeks before I could return to work. Sometimes I would take 2 weeks off and need 3 weeks before my body would allow me to go back to work. People often think that vacation restores energy. For me, vacation became recovery time. What I didn't understand back then was that I wasn't recovering. I was just surviving. I kept thinking that if I could just leave the bedside, things would get better. I thought maybe it was the stress. I thought maybe it was the environment. I thought maybe it was the workload. I thought maybe it was just not a place or an environment in which I could thrive and get better. But the truth was, wherever I went, the symptoms followed me. The floor changed, the job changed, the department changed, but the illness remained. And looking back now, I realized something. My doctor was right. She knew another COVID infection wouldn't be good for me. And unfortunately, that was the absolute truth. At the time, I thought I was fighting to get my old life back. I didn't realize I was beginning to build an entirely new one. Thank you for listening to Enduring Long COVID. If this episode resonated with you, please follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. You can also leave a rating or a review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps other people living with long COVID, ME/CFS, dysautonomia, and chronic illness find this community. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, please share the podcast with them. Until next time, please take care of yourself. Rest when you need to. Give yourself grace. And then give yourself more grace. And remember, you are not alone.